Hello, I'm Mr. Eliason, and welcome to APUSH. Today we're going to be talking about the conformity of the 1950s. And apologies, this one is going to be a little bit shorter than normal because we've got a lot of video and audio resources that we generally use in here that you should definitely look up on your own and listen to. But I'm not going to play over this video for the sake of time. So we're going to go through this stuff, and keep in mind, definitely go and check out all the supplements because they add a lot to this whole discussion. So let's move forward. Here are our objectives for today. Take a moment and pause and take them in, and let's dive into our story. So, the election of 1956 doesn't really have anything super exciting. It's a rematch of 52. Really, the only drama is the potential corruption of Richard Nixon. There was some question of Nixon getting unfair campaign contributions and some potential problems with his taxes. But Nixon went on television and assured everyone that this wasn't a problem. The only unfair campaign contribution he got was a little dog named Checkers that he's not going to give back because his daughter loves it. And so he's going to promise to be better and to not have any political problems going forward. So fortunately, that's the end of the political corruption with Nixon, and he's going to stay on the straight and narrow from here on out. He's going to stay on the ticket as Eisenhower's vice president, despite the fact that Eisenhower didn't particularly like him. And everything's going to be fine with Nixon. No potential problems there. Easy coasting to re-election. Adlai Stevenson, is only going to win the states that are currently voting against Abraham Lincoln. And, Eisenhower's going to sweep to an easy nomination second term. The United States is going to go through a post-war boom of prosperity. You always have this sort of small downturn after war, and we saw that a little bit after World War II. But for the most part, the massive cost of rebuilding the rest of the world, coupled with the fact that the United States had remained, at least our infrastructure and everything else had been mostly untouched during the war, is going to lead the U.S. to become sort of a world leader in, economic growth and prosperity. The Bretton Woods system is going to have most other countries tie their currency to the US dollar, which is going to be hugely beneficial for Americans. The IMF is going to allow us to flex our financial muscles, providing loans to the rest of the world, and is mostly going to be controlled by the United States. And all of this is going to lead to some pretty substantial benefits for the US. Home ownership is going to skyrocket, the reasons that we're going to talk about here momentarily. Specifically, the GI Bill signed by Roosevelt was sort of a reaction to the disastrous demobilization of World War I. This GI Bill is going to provide many more services for veterans, so take a moment and pause and read, and we're going to move on. One of the most important benefits of the GI Bill was, of course, allowing veterans to go to college, allowing veterans to get loans, to start businesses, to buy houses, things like that. The only downside, unfortunately, is because a lot of the money was given to states to be distributed, certain states and regions are going to not give it to Black veterans at the same rate as white veterans. And so a lot of Black veterans are going to be locked out of GI Bill benefits. Which, of course, if you've been following this class up to this point, is not surprising to anybody. We're going to see a substantial growth of the suburbs during this time period. Cheap construction techniques, specifically like those in Levittown developments, are going to lead to a massive boom of these sort of identical houses. Specifically, Levittowns show up in New Jersey and a bunch of other places. And the benefit of this is that because the houses were mass produced, you could choose, out of a number of different models, and they could build your house in sometimes less than a week. This coupled with, so the government providing, sort of low interest loans to veterans is going to lead to a huge expansion of the suburbs. And you're going to see, again, in the 1950s and 60s, you're going to see this huge growth in suburban development that's going to continue all the way until today. The benefit of the suburbs, of course, is you could own your own house, which then helps you build multi-generational wealth. You have a nice yard for your kids to play in, a garden out back, and you can, you're close enough to the city that you can still commute to your job there. Of course, the downside of these suburbs is they generally had racial exclusion clauses banning non-white people from buying houses there. This was partially because of de facto segregation and racism, and partially because a lot of this was written into the deeds, banning white people from selling the houses to non-white people. And so this is going to be a huge barrier for non-white people because, of course, without buying a house, you have to pay all this money to rent, which you're not going to be able to recoup later. The Eisenhower administration also significantly increased infrastructure through the interstate highway system. This helped connect the country together more efficiently. There was a huge rally to do this by having people drive across the country to highlight the dilapidated state of the nation's highways. And so these new interstate highways are going to be new, they're going to be federally managed and paid for. They're going to provide evacuation routes in case of a nuclear war, and they're going to also provide potential landing strips for airplanes. So, both important for civilian and military purposes, and they're a pretty fantastic highway system, that allow us to traverse the country much more easily than we would have otherwise. You can see the downside, of course, of this interstate highway system is because local government officials are going to determine where these are built, they often tend to cut through low income and non white communities, which is going to cause some problems as far as the bulldozing of black homes, black businesses, things like that. Television is going to rise in popularity during this time period. The television, of course, allows broadcasted images directly into people's homes. It's going to some degree, reinforce traditional values with shows like Father Knows Best, which I've never actually watched, but this promotional poster for it basically tells you a lot of what you might need to know about Father Knows Best. And comedians like Lucille Ball both help to break out of traditional gender roles, but also reinforce them in some ways, because she and her friend Ethel often get into scrapes and then have to be bailed out by her husband. So, in some ways, expanding the roles of women, in some ways, reinforcing traditional gender roles. We're going to see a significant increase in births during this time period. People were putting off having children both because of the economic struggle of the Great Depression and also World War II. So the baby boom generation is going to start in the aftermath here. And so we're going to see a significant increase in the amount of people having children. This is going to eventually lead to the rise of an increasing demographic of teenagers who are going to like things like fast food and rock and roll music, which of course is going to be viewed from old people as the destruction of society. Old people, of course, always think that the new things that the kids are into are going to bring society down. And of course, I'm no exception, assuming that all the social media apps that the kids are into are going to bring the downfall of Western civilization. You should probably know Elvis Presley as far as making rock and roll, which was before this a predominantly black sort of a medium, safe for white people on account of his whiteness, but not safe for white people on account of his dancing and hip swaying. And then, of course, the British invasion begins with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, with their long hair and other general subversive attitude, generally bringing down and destroying Western civilization. Mixed in with all this fantastic prosperity is also the potential for nuclear annihilation. This was felt pretty profoundly by many Americans. The understanding that the Soviet Union had the atom bomb, that we were developing, intercontinental ballistic missiles and things like that, led to the rise of duck and cover drills in schools. It led to a new wave of religiosity, to contrast us with the godless commies. We're going to add the phrase under God into the Pledge of Allegiance, just sort of like shoehorning in the middle where it doesn't fit at all in the cadence. But of course, then we're going to assume it's always been there. And all of this is going to contribute to the sense of general unease and the potential sense that the world could end at any moment. We're going to see a whole bunch of millennialist movements in the second half of the 20th century, with various groups claiming that they know exactly when the world is going to end, because it seems much more likely that the world could end, not just from divine intervention, but potentially from, a global nuclear catastrophe. And so, just like the 1920s, you've got this era of massive cultural growth, but also of uncertainty and potential fear for a lot of people. This poem kind of captures the mood of practicing and participating in duck and cover drills. So take a moment and read it. It may be one of the most chilling things you'll read all semester here. Art is also going to experiment with new styles. You, of course, get abstract impressionism with people like Jackson Pollock tossing paint at a canvas. Generally, this is seen by some people as sort of a destruction of traditional artistic forms. But of course, like all art, He is very precise with the things that he's doing, and it provides a window into sort of the viewer's psyche. And people like Andy Warhol are going to criticize consumerism with the creation of pop art, which I will fully admit I do not get at all. So I get that it's a thing. I understand what it's doing, but it's mostly lost on me. So, we're all Philistines about some things. We also get this created ideal of the 50s housewife. As more and more people move to the suburbs, as people are able to afford these homes, as in general, because of unionized protections, men's wages are going to be increasing. We start to get this idea that there's that only one of the men are going to go out and work, and women are going to be confined to this cult of domesticity. New labor-saving devices makes this easier for women, as one woman without any domestic servants or one person without any domestic servants can now carry out the whole like child rearing and domestic chores thing with less help. And so we get this created ideal that you have these separate spheres, with the man's sphere being going out and working and making money, and the wife's sphere being confined to the house. We get guides like this, which, again, lay out specific gender roles and, this sort of divide between men and women, and sort of lay out a clear hierarchy between men and women that some women find oppressive. This account of a 50s housewife sort of lays out part of the problem of this idea that, there's not specifically anything wrong with this, and for a lot of people, this system works relatively well. But for other people, for other women, they find themselves somewhat unfulfilled by these sort of strict gender roles. This sense of unfulfillment is most perfectly captured in Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, basically laying out that the sort of tight gender roles that women are that are popularized after World War II feel very oppressive for a lot of women who would like greater opportunities. And so this is very much the beginning of second wave feminism, which we're going to spend a lot more time talking about as we go forward. So you should definitely go and watch the various videos about this. Absolutely go and listen to Little Boxes, watch some Elvis Presley, watch some of the Beatles, watch the Duck and Cover video, and enjoy all of the sort of video primary sources. And for next time, we're going to move into civil rights movements and social change being pushed forward. But for now, I'll leave you there. So thank you for listening.